Welcome to Life Stories. Everyone faces challenges. But sometimes, the biggest battles aren't fought with fists, they're fought with determination, courage, and the refusal to back down. Today's story follows Jake, a hardworking farm boy who stands against injustice, proving that intelligence and perseverance can break through the toughest barriers. From school bullies to a life-changing exam, his journey is one of resilience, redemption, and the power of standing up for what's right. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. Let's dive into a powerful story about courage, empathy, and the lessons that shape us. I never thought my life would change over something as simple as a carton of milk. But that day in the halls of Lincoln High, I realized that some people don't need a reason to make your life miserable. They just do it because they can. Travis had always been the kind of guy who thrived on power, the kind of kid who walked into a room and expected the world to part for him like the Red Sea. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had that effortless confidence that made teachers turn a blind eye and made weaker kids keep their heads down. I wasn't weak. At least, I didn't think I was. It happened so fast. One moment, I was reaching into my locker, and the next, I felt something cold and thick running down the back of my neck. The smell hit me before the laughter did. Warm, sour milk soaking into my hoodie, trickling down my spine. The hallway erupted in a chorus of amusement. And as I turned, wiping my eyes, I met Travis's smug grin. "Move," he said, shoving the empty carton into my chest. "Breathe that in. That's what your future is gonna smell like." I clenched my fists. Every fiber in my body screamed at me to stand my ground. But I knew better. Kids like me, kids whose dads worked the fields, whose hands were rough with labor, whose clothes weren't brand new, weren't supposed to fight back. We were supposed to swallow our pride and keep our heads down. But something in me snapped. I shoved him. Not hard. Not the way I wanted to. Just enough to make him stumble. To wipe that grin off his face. But in Lincoln High, it wasn't about what was fair, it was about who had the louder voice. And Travis's voice reached the right ears. The next thing I knew, I was in Mr. Whitaker's office. My dad sitting stiffly beside me, his work boots caked in dust, his plaid shirt still damp with sweat from the fields. Across from us, Travis sat slouched in his chair, feigning innocence. "Mr. Dawson," Whitaker said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "This is unacceptable. Attacking another student. I always knew you were no better than an animal." I shot up from my chair. "That's not what happened." He pawed. "I don't want to hear it," Whitaker snapped. "There is no excuse for violence. Your time at Lincoln High is over." I turned to my dad, hoping, praying, that he'd fight for me, that he'd raise his voice and demand justice. But he just let out a slow breath, the kind that carried years of exhaustion and swallowed words that would never be spoken. "Pack your locker," he said, his voice steady but hollow. "We'll discuss this at home." I felt the room closing in on me. The injustice of it all made my chest tight, made my eyes burn with something dangerously close to tears. Travis sat there, smirking, knowing he'd won. But I wasn't going to let him. I turned to Whitaker, my voice shaking but firm. "Let me take the Midwest Regional Math exam." Whitaker blinked. "Excuse me? If I fail," I said, forcing my hands to stay still, "I'll leave. You'll never have to see me again. But if I pass, you apologize to me, in front of the whole school." For a moment, silence hung between us. Then Whitaker let out a short, humorless laugh. "Fine. You can take the exam. Makes no difference whether you leave now or in a few days." I didn't look at my dad. I didn't need to. I could feel his worry pressing against me like a weight. But I wasn't doing this for him. Or for me. I was doing this for every kid who had ever been told they didn't belong. Travis leaned back in his chair, his grin returning. "You've got no idea who you're up against." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Neither do you." The night before the exam, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my notes. But the numbers blurred together. My dad sat across from me, his hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, silent as he watched me pretend to study. "You don't have to do this, Jake," he said finally. His voice was quiet, careful. "There are other schools. We'll figure something out." I tightened my grip on my pencil. "No, Dad. We won't." He didn't argue. He never did. That was the thing about him, he was a man who bore his burdens without complaint. He'd lost my mom when I was 6. And ever since, it had been just the two of us. He worked long days, came home late, and never once asked for anything. But I could see it in his face, the weight of it all. The fear that I was about to lose everything we had worked for. So, I had to win. The next morning, I walked into the exam room, my heart pounding in my chest. The proctor, a stiff-looking woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, gave her instructions in a monotone voice. "You have 3 hours to complete 8 sections. Each section is worth 40 points. If you score under 20 in any section, you fail." Fail. That word sat heavy in my mind. "You may begin." The room fell into silence. Just the sound of pencils scratching against paper. I forced myself to take a breath, to focus. I'd always been good at math, numbers made sense when nothing else did. They weren't subjective. They weren't unfair. A right answer was a right answer, no matter where you came from or how much money your family had. The first problem was easy. The second, a little trickier. But as I worked through each section, the knots in my stomach slowly unwound. I knew this. I knew this. Hours passed in a blur. And before I knew it, the proctor was calling time. I put my pencil down, my hands aching, my mind exhausted. "Mr. Whitaker will collect your tests. Results will be posted outside my door in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of waiting, of uncertainty, of not knowing whether my future still existed. I barely slept during those 14 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers, equations, the smug look on Travis's face when Whitaker had sided with him. And then, the day arrived. The hallway outside the office was packed. Students crowded around the bulletin board, whispering and pointing. My hands felt clammy as I pushed through the bodies, my eyes scanning the list. Then I saw it. Jake Dawson, 32320, perfect score. For a moment, I just stared. It didn't feel real. But then, slowly, I turned. Whitaker stood nearby, pale, his mouth slightly open. A teacher beside him let out a low whistle. Not often we see a perfect score on the regional exam. My heart was racing. I turned to Whitaker, waiting. He cleared his throat, his gaze darting around like he wanted to be anywhere else. But there was no escape. I apologize," he muttered. "Not good enough," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to do it in front of everyone." The next morning, at the school assembly, he did. His voice was flat, forced. But I didn't care. I had won. Winning the math exam should have felt like the end of the battle. But it wasn't. Even after Mr. Whitaker's forced apology, even after the stares in the hallways changed from pity to something closer to respect, I knew that people like Travis didn't just give up. They found new ways to tear others down. And I wasn't his only target. It started with whispers. At first, just background noise, passing comments about a girl named Emily. I barely knew her, but I'd seen her around, quiet, always keeping to herself. Then, one day, she just disappeared. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she ran away. Others, crueler ones, suggested something worse. And at the center of it all, Ashley. Ashley was the kind of person who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of their place. She had money, influence, and a social circle that revolved around her. She didn't just want power, she wanted control. And Emily, for whatever reason, had become her latest victim. I overheard a conversation near the lockers one afternoon. I bet Ashley had something to do with it. She always hated Emily. She probably ran her out of town. That was when I noticed a girl standing near the edge of the group, her head down, her arms crossed. Kitty. One of Ashley's friends, or, at least, one of her followers. She looked guilty. I didn't think much of it until I saw her again the next day, standing alone by the water fountain, her fingers twitching like she was battling with herself. I walked up, speaking before I had time to second-guess myself. "You know something, don't you?" She startled, turning to me, wide-eyed. "What?" "No." I folded my arms. "Then why do you look like you haven't slept in days?" She hesitated. I saw it, the flicker of hesitation. "The war between right and wrong. I didn't know it would go this far," she whispered finally. "I thought it was just a joke." A joke. She told me everything. How Ashley had stolen Emily's only family photo, the one she carried everywhere. How she had ripped it up in front of her, laughing, calling it worthless. How Emily had run from the cafeteria, crying, and never came back. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I need to find her," I said. Kitty looked at me, fear in her eyes. "Ashley will know it was me. Then help me fix it before it's too late." That night, I found Emily. She wasn't far, just hiding, trying to make herself invisible. She flinched when she saw me, but I held up my hands. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said gently. I have something for you." I held out a small envelope. Inside was the photo, pieced together, taped carefully along the edges. She stared at it, then at me. "I'm sorry," I said. She took it, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you." And just like that, the cycle of cruelty broke. In the end, Lincoln High didn't change overnight. People like Travis and Ashley would always exist, finding new ways to make others feel small. But that didn't mean they won. Emily returned to school, quieter than before, but stronger. She wasn't invisible anymore, not to me. Not to the few who had seen what had happened and decided that silence wasn't an option. Kitty, once one of Ashley's closest friends, walked away from that group for good. She learned the hard way that standing by and watching cruelty happen was just as bad as participating in it. As for me, I packed my bags for MIT, leaving Lincoln High behind but taking every lesson with me. Before I left, I saw Travis one last time. He was sitting outside the cafeteria, laughing with his friends like nothing had ever happened. But when he saw me, his laughter faded. "You always had the choice to be kind," I told him. "But you chose differently." He didn't respond. Maybe he never would. But that wasn't my burden to carry. Life isn't about waiting for the world to be fair, it's about standing up when it isn't. It's about choosing to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Because in the end, the real victory isn't in proving people wrong, it's in proving yourself right. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring videos.